Hey folks, welcome to week 3 of GID 109, Intro to Web Design. Alright, how's everybody doing? Hopefully you're working hard on your speculative historical research paper. Okay, so this week we're going to introduce a brand new concept. We're going to talk about sort of front-end UX design and wireframing and user testing, which is part of the process we are going to use in building our 2 web design projects this semester. But first, of course, we have to get to know it. So the cover photo for our class here, you'll see, which I mentioned before, is somebody doing what's called paper wireframing, which is part of a rapid prototyping process. Basically, it's a simple way to sketch out websites before you actually go ahead and start designing them on the computer, before you start coding anything, before you start using design software like Adobe XD to create a prototype. You want to do it on paper, right? This is no different than sketching out ideas for a poster design or a flyer design or a postcard or some other piece of graphic design that you would be creating. You want to do it on paper quickly, rapidly, and just sort of get your ideas out there. Now, wireframing is a concept that's specific to web design, and we're going to get into how that works in a second. So let's take a look at the module, right? So let's go over to modules and projects. And like I said, we're in week 3, so let's go to the week 3 module. Okay, so we have 3 handouts that we're going to use here. We're going to go through these in a minute. The UX workflow, we're going to talk about what a workflow is and show an example of one. We're going to talk about wireframe mockups, which we just mentioned. We'll go through what those are all about. And we're going to talk about what is usability testing and how to go ahead and do it, because that's something we're going to be doing for our projects, okay? So make sure you download all 3 of these handouts. You are going to need them, okay? All right, now up here in the overview, like I said, we are introducing ourselves this week to the idea of user experience design. This is a front-end practice, meaning that this is done at the initial stages of the web design process before you start actually designing anything, right? So we're going to talk about the UX workflow, what is usability testing, and wireframe mockups. We do have some media to consume this week. There is a video talking about UX research methods and usability testing. This is the video here. This gentleman here, Jacob Nielsen, goes through sort of an overview about why you want to do user testing in your initial stages of designing a website, why you want to get that prototype, even if it's on paper, in front of some people, some possible end users, and get their opinion on the user interface, the general layout, how it works, how it functions, and ask them some really basic questions, right? So we'll get into usability testing in a minute, but watch this video early this week so that you can get a rough idea about why user testing is important, okay? So that's one consumable. We have another consumable that's inside the usability testing handout, but we'll get to that in a second. Your homework for the week is just to continue working on your historical speculative paper and digital poster. Part 1 of that, your background research, you should be working on now, right? That is due next week, so make sure you're working on that. Go back to the handout for the historical speculative paper and make sure you're clear on what part 1 is. Remember, if you have any questions on that, email me or show up on my Zoom office hours and I can clarify for you. Okay, so let's dive into user experience design and see what this is all about. So we're going to start with the UX workflow, which is this right here. And let's talk about what a workflow is. Now, you might have heard the phrase workflow in some of your other design classes, and this is an example of a workflow. This is not to say it's the only workflow out there. And this specifically is a web design workflow. All a workflow is a way of working, a system of getting through a project in linear steps that teams of people would be working on to complete a website project. Now, in our class, of course, you guys are going to be working as students and as individuals or smaller groups. But in the real world, of course, larger teams of people work on web design projects, but the steps that they follow are kind of roughly the same. So this here is a workflow example using sort of Venn diagrams, bubble charts as it were, showing the various stages you go through in developing a website and sort of how they overlap each other and roughly how much time each one takes up based on sort of the size of the bubble that's being represented here, okay? And of course, it's color-coded. The phases are color-coded down here. So I just want to sort of go through it, and then we'll talk about which portion of this web flow this class takes place in. Because, of course, no single web design class can cover all of these steps. There's just no way. We're going to cover some of them. Now, there are, of course, 3 web design classes in your curriculum, and so you'll get through the rest of these in other classes. But let's talk about what it looks like. So up at the top here, we have sort of what the designer would go through, or the team of designers in getting through the web design project, okay? So the first part, of course, is the initial meeting with the client, right? That's where you sit down with the client, you go over what their requests are, what their needs are, what they're looking for in the project, and what kind of problems they're trying to solve, right? Then the next part is called a needs assessment. That's where you as the designer and your team of people, probably your boss and some other people on the team, you would sit down and based on what the client asked for and what the client presented to you, you would sort of make a list of needs that you think that the client is trying to accomplish in the creation of this particular website. What are their goals? If it's a retail company and they're trying to sell clothing, well, obviously one of their goals is to sell more clothing. But they also have other means like creating communities, communicating with their clients, getting feedback from people, showing new things to their customers, and so on and so forth. So what are their needs? What are they trying to accomplish? Then the next phase of development is research. Notice how research is a much bigger bubble. It overlaps with the needs assessment as well as some other stages, right? And so the research stage is really important, just like any design project. You want to go do a bunch of research on your client, on your client's competition, on what they do, and what it's all about. Now, when we get to our first project, you're going to see that there is going to be lots of opportunity for you to get your research done. Research is hugely important. Now, of course, research can just take the form of opening up a Microsoft Word document and keeping a running document going with as much research as you can jam in there, right? And whether it be reading or drawing or photography or whatever. You can, of course, do research by hand in a sketchbook or a notebook. Either way, research is hugely important. Okay, the next thing we get to is a site outline. Site outlines look a lot like organization charts in that this gives you a sense of the type of pages or the number of pages that you want to include in your website, right? And you do it just in outline format, just like you would do for sort of a book report or a research paper, right? So it's just an outline, kind of looks like an organizational chart. And then the next thing you make from your site outline is a site map. Now, sitemaps really look like organizational charts in that it starts out with the home page, which, of course, in web design is referred to as the index page, right? And then from there, it goes down into the next set of pages that would make up the uppermost navigation of the website, the main pages of the website. And then it trickles down from there into the other pages, right? Now we get into wireframes. Wireframes, as we saw in our earlier photograph there, are just really simplified drawings of sort of the general layout of the web pages, and you use things like rectangles and squares and X's and sort of dummy type or temporary type just to hold places, just so that you can sort of get a general idea of what the layout of the website looks like. We're going to look at wireframes more specifically in a minute. Okay, the next stage in the process would be a content outline. This is where sort of the designers and the content writers would sort of make a more in-depth outline as to what's actually going to be on the website in terms of writing and photography and graphics and pretty much everything that has to be in there from a content point of view, okay? Then you move into the green stage here, and this is where we start getting into the visual design of the website, right? Which can be done in Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, or as we're going to do in this class, in Adobe XD, a prototyping tool, right? And this is where you sort of start making your first visual designs for the landing page, which of course is the home page, also known as the index page. I know there's a lot of names for the same page, right? And the reason why you want to establish sort of the visual artwork, the visual look of the home page first is because that, of course, is going to inform the way the rest of the website looks. So the fonts you choose, the color palette you use, the various sorts of visual decisions that you make will then perpetuate themselves amongst the rest of the website. So focusing your sort of visual artwork on the home page first, the landing page, is a good way to get going. Then, of course, once you are settled on that and you're really happy with it, you start working on the visual design and the artwork for the interior pages, right? The remainder of the website. Notice the giant overlap between the two of these, because naturally, in any sort of visual development, you're going to make choices in the first one that's going to affect the interior pages and back and forth, right? Then, of course, now we move into the next stage, which is where the site starts getting coded, right? The HTML, the CSS, any PHP that needs to be in there, JavaScript, et cetera, all the coding that will make up the structure of the website now really sort of starts happening into the next stages. Now, in this class, we don't get into this. Now, you are doing some coding exercises on Codecademy so that you can become familiar with and get introduced to HTML and CSS, but we are not actually coding the websites that we build in this class. We are building them as prototypes in Adobe XD, which could then later be coded. In fact, you might later code them in your next web design class. But this particular class, Web Design 1, basically ends right here at the end of the green bubble, right? So we are going through sort of our initial client meeting, which is how we introduce the project, and then we go through the red area, which is sort of all the background material, right? A needs assessment, doing our research, making a site outline, a site map, doing our wireframing. Somewhere right around here, even though it's not listed in this workflow, we are then going to do our usability testing and show our early wireframes to some potential users, and then we move into creating the artwork and the prototype in Adobe XD. Now, to be honest with you, we're actually doing more than just creating the artwork in this class. We're actually going to create a functioning prototype using those prototyping tools in Adobe XD. So that sort of elevates the artwork more from just a visual representation of the website to actually a functional presentation of the website. But we'll get to that soon. So that's sort of where this class would come to an end. And then, of course, the coding and everything else would happen after the fact. But I wanted to show you an entire workflow just so you get the idea that developing a website is really a multi-stage process involving many people. And so it goes through a lot of different stages, and there's a lot of sort of back and forth and revisions and iterations, just like any other large design project. So anyway, this is roughly the workflow we're going to be using in this class up until this point, and you may continue with the rest of this in other classes. And either way, I want you to be aware of just what a web design workflow looks like, okay? Okay, great. So now let's focus on some specifics of what we're going to be doing in the UX process, and that is wireframes, and then, of course, immediately after that, user testing. So let's take a look at what wireframes are. Okay, so there's a handout right back here, right? Wireframe mockups. Let's take a look at what those are. Make sure you download that. And so you're going to read through this on your own, but I'm going to go through it right now. Make sure that you go through it again so that you fully understand what the heck a wireframe mockup is, okay? Okay, starting a digital mockup website or mobile app design without first creating a series of low-fidelity wireframes as a series of design sequences can actually be a product killer. Meaning that just like in print graphic design projects, you don't jump immediately to the finished product. First, you're going to do some brainstorming, and then you're going to do some thumbnail sketches, and then you're going to do some rough sketches, and then work your way up to some comp sketches, some larger, slightly more detailed sketches, just so that you can really work out all the details of what you think your project should look like and how it should function. And you're going to do versions of your sketches, right? You're going to do iterations, different opportunities for solving different problems. And you're going to do all this on paper before you even get to the computer. It's important to do these low-fidelity wireframes for the same reason that we do series of sketches in print design projects. Now, low fidelity, of course, means non-computerized, right? It's easy to just pull out a piece of paper and start sketching. Now, good designers start with pen and paper or pencil and grid pad. Wireframe design for web design works really well with grid pads, right? Graph paper, grid pads, dot paper, anything that is sort of portioned out into equal spaces that allows it to make it easy for you to sort of measure out the size and shape of your web pages as well as where the different elements are going to go, right? So you really want to sort of spend some time hammering out the basics of your pages or the screens that you're working on. Wireframes, of course, are meant to be done quick and dirty, right? And rarely, if ever, are going to represent the final layout. They're just like thumbnail sketches or initial sketches. They're meant to be done quickly and just get the ideas out of your head onto paper, fast, without the software or anything else getting in your way, okay? Wireframes are also devoid of subjective elements such as color or fonts. We're doing them on paper quickly because we don't want to be influenced by how much we like a particular font or, gee, I really love that color palette, I'm going to stick with it. You don't want to nail down your choices this early. You're just working out ideas, right? This is intentional. So the first reason this is intentional is that you're just trying to get a bead on the direction you want to head in and, of your client. What does your client want? You've got to work out those solutions on paper before you really get married to a particular idea, right? In real life, clients generally have a really poor sense of anything which is incomplete, right? If you show a client a sketch with sort of a red banner at the top of it, right? If you include color, the client's just going to focus on that red banner. They're going to be like, oh, I love that red banner. Let's stick with that. Or they're going to say, that's not really the right color red. And you don't want that to be the conversation. You want the conversation to just be about the general layout and the general ideas. So simple wireframes make user testing really simple, right? You're not asking anybody to get on a computer. You're not asking anybody to judge anything too permanent. You're just asking them to try to accomplish some basic tasks by looking at these paper wireframes, okay? And we'll talk about how that works when we get to user testing in a second. So wireframes, of course, are great in agile teams. Now, what's an agile team? So in the web design world, rapid prototyping, which is putting together ideas quickly, hence the word rapid, and being able to change your mind and get feedback and do different versions quickly, hence the term agile, is really important in sort of cycling through a bunch of brainstorming ideas quickly, right? You don't want to be tied down to anything. So below here, and I'm going to go through them, here are some examples of what your wireframes can look like. Okay, now this first one is done on dot paper. So you're going to want to get yourself either some dot paper or some graph paper. They come in notebooks. They come as individual sheets. You can get them at Staples. You can get them at Michael's. You can get them on Amazon. They're easy to come by. You've probably used graph paper before in school for other reasons, but it comes in handy for what we're doing. Now, dot paper is pretty much the same as graph paper, but instead of having lines, it's just a series of equidistant dots, okay? So if you look at this example of wireframing here, I'm going to zoom in a little further so we can get a better view of it, right? You can see that this particular designer just used a ruler and a pencil to just sort of gently lay out the basic shape of a scrolling website. And you can identify some of the common elements of the website here. We've got the 3 dots in the upper left corner, right? The close button, the minimize button, the maximize button, the header of the window, right? And then you've got the first section of the website. You can see that there's a go button, right? This section here should look familiar to you, right? Those are geographic placement pins, right? So this must be a map of some kind with a search bar. And you can see that the elements of the website are just really roughly sketched in. In fact, they definitely used a ruler for the main structure of the website, but for the elements on the inside, they're just done by hand. So they can be rough to a degree. They have to be recognizable. You don't want them to be so rough that your user testers can't identify what they're looking at. But at the same time, they don't have to be super perfect either. And you'll see that these horizontal lines delineate different sections of the web page. On a scrolling web page, of course, you can only see a certain part of the web page at a time on your screen, and so these other sections sort of show what scrolls down behind it. Notice that over to the right, there's some loose sketches for different elements, just because they're sort of working out what things are going to look like. This here represents a video box, right, with a play button, so you get the idea. Okay, let's look at a different example of wireframes. Okay, now these are done in a dot paper notebook, same idea. And again, drawn by hand. This person didn't even bother to use a ruler to do the major outline. Just they have the different parts in. It's supposed to look like tabs, just to give you an idea that, hey, I'm in a web browser. And you can see that they are putting in some really basic elements of what's going on, right? Now, in looking at this, you should sort of have an instinctual understanding of like how the website is structured. Not a lot of detail, right? You should be able to do these quickly. All right, here's another example of one. Okay, now this is also done on dot paper. Now this is for some kind of a music player or a media player. It could be a website for a streaming service, right? And you'll see that most of the typography, the words are just scribbles, right? But then they go ahead and write in some words too. But that's clearly a search bar. Those are your play, pause, and progressive controls for managing your streaming service, the names of the songs. This is probably for the user identity, for the member identity, right? Your username, a profile picture, etc., some statistics, some social media sharing buttons. So you get the idea. So with just some basic drawing skills, you can sort of flesh out how your website is going to be laid out and how different elements are going to interact with each other. All right, let's look at another example. Now, these are kind of funny. This is for a mobile app, not for a website specifically, but I wanted to show it to you anyway because it does show some different ways of sort of doing your wireframes. We're going to be working on desktop websites, not mobile apps, but this is still useful. You can see here that this shows 4 of the different screens for the mobile app. Just by looking at this, you should be able to identify what these different screens are, right? That's sort of your landing page. That's your sign-in page. This gives you some data, some information. This appears to be some kind of health app, or as it says here, stress tracker. The illustration of the woman on the side really has nothing to do with the wireframes, but they do show that this pairs with a piece of hardware that clips onto your ear, so you get the idea. But anyway, I just wanted to show you different ways in which you can sort of draw your wireframes. Okay, so now those are samples, but of course you're going to make your wireframes for your website design on paper using either dot paper or graph paper. I don't care which one. You need a ruler and you need a pencil. That's it. Simple. Very lo-fi. Very lo-fi. Okay, now when we get to our projects, you are going to actually make wireframe pages for each screen of the web design. Now, we're not going to be designing entire websites. That would take far too long. We're only going to design a handful of screens. So what you're going to do is you're going to design each screen on one piece of paper, right? And then you're going to be able to use those in your user testing. You're going to slide those pieces of paper in front of some human beings, and you're going to give them some things to do. And with their finger, they'll be able to point to the different areas on the page as if they are interacting with the website. Now, let's get more into what usability testing is, okay? So this is the What is Usability Testing handout. Again, you can get that right here, What is Usability Testing. So make sure you download that, and then we're going to be able to go through what this is, okay? It's just a one-page document, super simple. Now, when we get to our actual first web design project, we're going to not only make our wireframes, but we're going to go ahead and go out into the world and do some usability testing. So what you probably want to do now is start identifying some people in your life who will be able to help you with the usability testing, right? It can be people you live with, friends, family, whatever you want. Okay, so let's talk about what usability testing is. So usability testing is a way to see how easy to use something is by testing it with actual users, right? You're going to sort of test it out in an environment that is low stress, low risk, and you just want to see how they respond to it. Because as designers, we can put a lot of effort into designing the way a web page looks, and we might think it's the best thing we've ever designed, but then you go ahead and put it in front of somebody and say, okay, find me the media player. And they stare at it, and they wait, and they can't find it. And then all of a sudden you realize you might like this design you made, but you didn't really put the elements into the design in such a way that are easy to find. Remember, the key to a good website is that your user, the person who lands on the website, can figure out how to use the website and find what they need to find quickly. People have no attention span. They want to be able to get what they want to get and get out of there. People don't spend a lot of time on websites when they're looking for something. They need to find what they need quickly and move on. And if they can't find what they need, well, they'll move on to another website. And so user testing gives us the opportunity to not really talk about how good looking our design is, but how functional our design is. And that's really key in web design, is its function has to come first before the looks of it, right? It has to function properly. This is why we start out with wireframes that really don't really talk at all about how good looking it is. It's really about just where the elements are placed on the page, how easy they are to interact with, and can the user find them and interact with them quickly. Okay, so users are asked to complete tasks typically while they're being observed by a researcher. You're going to play the role of researcher in this case, right? So you're not only the designer of the website, you're also the researcher. And you're going to see if they encounter any problems, right? So just by way of definition, remember, a user is a human and the researcher is you, the student, right? Okay, so this is some things you're going to need to do your user testing. We're going to keep this real easy, okay? You're going to need printouts or clear copies of your best wireframe mockup. So once you're done making a wireframe for each page of your design, you're going to make copies of them. You're going to need more than one, right? So you can photocopy them and make a few copies of each, because we're going to have different user testers and you're going to want to have a few copies, right? So make some copies of your best wireframe mockups, right? Organize them into piles so that it's nice and clear, and so that you don't get confused when you're trying to hand different pages to people to work with, okay? You're going to write up a series of basic tasks that you would like your users to perform. Simple stuff like find the home page, Find the About Us page. Put in your username and password. Where would I click to do that? Find the photo gallery. Things like that. Nothing super complex, right? Write down the tasks, okay? Now, it doesn't have to be a ton of tasks. You're not going to give people 20, 30 things to do. But you want to give them, like, anywhere from like 5 to 12 things to do. Pretty straightforward stuff. Think about how you navigate websites when you land on them, right? What are the first things you look for? How do you want to find your way around the screen? So those should be your tasks. Simple, short sentences. Just give people things to do. Now, of course, you're going to need friends, fellow students, family members, or pretty much anybody who's willing to help you out, right? You need a minimum of 2 user testers for this class. So it can be anybody who's willing to help you, a minimum of 2 people. Now, if you get more people who want to help you out, that's great too. I'm not going to stop you. But a minimum of 2, okay? You need to have some sort of quiet place to perform the test with a flat surface. You want them to be able to sit down with the papers in front of them and then go ahead and get through the tasks that you are assigning them, okay? And then you need some kind of a notebook or whatnot to sort of document what happens. So make sure that you are jotting down what happens. If you ask one of your users, find the photo gallery, right? You should write down in your notebook, right, the name of the user, the task you gave them to do, and then what happened. Did they find the photo gallery immediately? Or did they take a couple of seconds? Were they completely lost? Could they not find it? Did they ask you questions? So jot down everything that happens. Now, of course, you don't have to do this in a notebook. You can document it on your phone in like a notes app. That's fine too. But you have to be able to document what happens with each of your user testers, okay? Remember, a minimum of 2 user testers. Now, if you'd like, if you want to really take this to the next level, you could video the actual user testing. You can film it if you would like. That's entirely up to you. Make sure you get the permission of your user testers first. Don't serendipitously videotape them. And of course, you should have some kind of a timer to track the responses, right? To keep track of how long it takes them to respond to each thing. So this requires a little bit of setup, right? You're going to need your phone. You're going to need a nice flat surface to work on. You're going to have all your printouts and make sure that, they are ready. Explain to them what they're going to do, right? Okay, so now here's the steps, right? So obviously write down the user's name. Briefly explain to your user what the purpose of the website is, okay? Don't go into a lot of detail about the website. Just sort of tell them this is a website for a cheeseburger place and they sell burgers and fries and shakes and they're inexpensive. Like, that's it. That's all you're going to tell them if it's a burger website. Don't get into a ton of detail. Just give them a brief overview and tell them that you're designing a website for them and you want to test out some of the functionality based on these paper wireframes that you made, right? So explain to them that they are going to use their finger as a pointing device. Now, whether that they are accessing something on a tablet, or if we were doing a mobile app, if they were doing it on a phone, or even if they're using a regular desktop computer and a mouse, the finger is a good tool to use to sort of replicate the idea of pointing and clicking on things, okay? They can point, they can swipe, they can pinch, whatever you need them to do, because most input devices these days will allow for that. Even desktop computers will have touchpads that you can use various hand motions on. So if you would like them to use those gestures, then you can tell them to. Otherwise, they can just point and click on things, okay? So then you're going to go through your list of tasks and you're going to ask them to perform the first task. Pay attention to what they're doing. Take notes on their performance. Note down how long did it take, how did they react, and did they ask you any questions, right? Now, if it only takes them like a half a second to do something, you can just say they did it immediately, right? But if they're sort of pausing and they can't quite figure out how to accomplish the task that you gave them, then certainly write down it took them a few seconds, or it took them a minute, or they couldn't complete the task, they couldn't figure it out at all. If they ask you questions, if they seem confused, or whatever, write that down too, right? Now, the goal here is not for them to get the task correct, okay? You're not really testing their ability. You're testing how easy it is to use your website. Make sense? So don't keep asking them to do something over and over and over again until they get it right. You only need to ask them to do it once and then see how they react. The goal is for you to learn how you can improve your website design, not for them to learn how to get it right. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, good. All right. Then, of course, you're going to ask them to perform the next task and then do it over again and repeat until you go through all of your tasks on your list. Again, Don't make them keep doing it over and over again until they get it right. Just have them do it once and then record their responses. If they simply can't get it, then the problem is not them. The problem is your design. You need to go back and redesign it. And that's okay. That's what usability testing is all about, right? If it turns out that you didn't really design the page in a way that's very clear, no big deal. You only did it on paper. You can go back and do it again. You're not going to spend that much time on it. You can actually go back and continue to come up with different ideas, better ideas, that will respond to the user's needs. Now, of course, remember, do not lead on the users. Don't guide them. Don't give them any hints, right? That's kind of important. Okay, and like I said, you're going to document everything, and what you're going to turn into us as part of your project is you're going to prepare a presentation. This can just be a simple Microsoft Word document, right? It could be a PowerPoint if you really want to get into it. You could create a video if you want to make it super fancy, but I'm happy with just a Microsoft Word document that has all of the information documented, nice and neat, easy to follow, okay? So make sure it's formatted properly, make sure it looks professional, but it can be as simple or as fancy as you want it to be. And of course, make sure you answer these questions, right? Who, what, why, when, why, and how. It's important. Okay, now, if you want to see an example of user testing in kind of a fun environment, check out this YouTube link here. And this video here is an actual usability testing session using paper prototypes done with a child. Now, it seems silly, but it gives you a great example as to how simple this should be. So watch this, and then now you'll be prepared for how we're going to do this, okay? All right, so that is it for this week. Make sure you download and read through all these handouts that we just went through. Watch this video, watch the video that's in What is Usability Testing, and really wrap your head around what the heck is user experience design, because both wireframes and usability testing we are going to be doing for our projects, okay? If you have any questions, concerns, if you're lost, if you're confused, or you just want to stop by and say hi, make sure to come see me on the Monday or Friday during my standing Zoom hours. I would love to see you. All right, hope you're doing well, and take care. I'll see you soon.